Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. Welcome, my name is Jim, and I'm excited to share with you what's on my heart. I'm a little nervous about going in a direction that I've not gone before, and I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. But I want to introduce to you Faith Influencer. This is going to be a podcast that's going to be under the umbrella of faith, and my goal, honestly, as the name says, is to influence you, but in a particular area. We're going to dive into the world of blended families. And that's a world that you don't hear about a lot, but I'm going to tell you that it's everywhere. And I'm going to tell you that I'm a part of this world of blended families too, but I want to be a little open with you, and I want to share with you how I got there and where I ended up in the blended family world and why I want to talk about this on this podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about me and my background. I come from a ministry background. And so I'm going to say right at the beginning, it was difficult for me to even think about going in this direction because I wasn't supposed to be a part of a blended family. I'm in ministry. I'm a pastor. I've gone through the years of study and the years of education. I went through years of counseling, and all of that is my background. But in that process, over a period of many, many years, I found that my own family and relationship was struggled, and my children, and before I knew it, I was a part of that statistic that half of all marriages end in divorce. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Wasn't supposed to happen to me. Probably wasn't supposed to happen to you. But here I am. And if I can be real honest, maybe some of it is because I came from the ministry world and I preached on marriage. I talked about all of this. I was devastated. It was shattering to me that all of a sudden I was in this position. And I don't know if you felt this, but I can tell you that for me, all of the emotions that you go through at a time like that in weeks and months and years after that, it was always difficult for me to even tell someone that I had been through a divorce. Even today, all of these years later, it still sounds strange for me to say that. But that's just the truth. The other thing that I found difficult was that I was piling up baggage as I was going through this, and post-divorce really started piling up baggage just because my background was that where I came from, the guy, the man, the husband, he was to lead his family and he was responsible for what happened. And so I took all of that responsibility on myself, so I was feeling all of that. So I know it's a two-way street. So I don't really have to go there. I know that, but I was carrying all the responsibility. But you know, when you come out of the church world, you feel like you're in the area of the unpardonable sin. And I'll be honest, and you know this, if you come from that world too, you know that sometimes that's how it's treated. You know how you're treated that way sometimes. So it's difficult when you come out of that world, and that's the world I came out of. I wanted a better response from the church, but some of that was my own feelings and some of my own issues. So I struggled. I struggled with accepting what I'd been through. I struggled the hurt with my children, who at the time were very young. I struggled with the loss of a dream. I struggled with the acceptance of God's grace. I struggled with all of that. So someone who has been married the first time and not through that really can't grasp what I'm talking about. But if you've been through a divorce, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, here's what happens. Let me fast forward now. Let's go several years in advance. Almost always, not 100%, but almost 100% of people who have been through a divorce remarry. Now we've entered into a whole new arena. And this is the part that's hard for people to accept, is that When you talk about first marriages, 50% of them end in divorce. You probably know that statistic. But do you know this one? Do you know that second marriages, almost 70% of second marriages end in divorce? I mean, that's tragic. You wouldn't think it would be that way because you would think, all right, I've been through this hurt once. I've been through this pain once. I've experienced all of this disappointment once. So now you would think that you would strive even harder to never let that happen again. Well, if you're like me, that was your intention. But the fact is, what do second marriages do? Most of them fail. That's just the truth. So why? Why do they fail? Well, statistically, again, they almost always fail because in a blended family, a second marriage, almost all the time, you're bringing his and her children together. Now, that's how I'm defining blended family. Not just a husband and a wife who remarry, but a husband and wife who are bringing children, his, hers, and ours. That's why blended families struggle. So here's what happens. When you bring in a blended family and he has his children and she has her children, unless you know the rules, that is going to be a disaster. I hate to say it that way, but that's why 70% end in divorce. It turns into a disaster. Part of it is because you're bringing baggage into that second marriage. Part of it is because you haven't gone through what I'm getting ready to tell you I went through by accident, or maybe I would say by the Lord. Fast forward, I now, years later, am going to remarry. And someone whispered to me, don't do it until you personally, until you as a couple go through counseling. So they introduced me to a counselor, Lanny. Lanny was a miracle in my life. And I sat down with Lanny, and this is how I felt. It's been years since my divorce. I'm good. I'm not feeling as strongly the things that I felt when I went through it. And now I've found someone else who's been through the same thing so we can relate. And she has young children. Now my children are older. And this is going to be wonderful. And if you're old enough, you know what I mean when I say this is the Brady Bunch. Now, not everyone knows what the Brady Bunch is, but it's this old show where it was a blended family, and he had 3 children and she had 3 children, and they blended the family, and it was an amazing outcome. Well, that's not reality. But guess what? It can be if you know the rules. I sat down with Lanny. Lanny pulled out a whiteboard, and he started writing things on the whiteboard. He started uncovering things. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that submerged in my subconscious was all of these issues unresolved. And Lanny said, Jim, you cannot take this into your new relationship. And so we began to work through those things. And then my wife-to-be, we went to counseling together, worked through those things, and I learned the rules as to how to survive when you pull his, hers, and ours together. So that was the direction we took. Then, fast forward years later, after that, now I've been remarried. I've walked this path, and we've experienced success, the ups and downs, but I knew the rules, and I knew the expectations, and I knew how to play the game. And in the meantime, now I find myself speaking to large groups on the subject of blended families and how to be successful when you bring his, hers, and ours together. I find myself in packed rooms. I discovered that any time that we put out the word that we were going to have a seminar or a conference on a blended family, that every seat was full. But you know why? Because people do not have this information. They do not understand the rules, and they're desperate to make this remarriage work with his, hers, and ours. So here's what we're going to do in this podcast. We're going to walk on ground that angels fear to walk on. We're going to deal with things and say things Okay, so listen, because if you are coming from a blended family, his, hers, and ours, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Others will not get what I'm about to say, but you're going to understand what I'm talking about. If this is your reality and this is your world like it is mine, there are things that you think that you feel like, I should not be thinking that about her children, or I shouldn't feel that way about his children. Or you're going to be thinking, there's probably nothing worse in the world than his ex or her ex. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with discipline? How do you handle all the things that come up? That's what we're going to deal with in this podcast. We're going to uncover all of those issues and how to deal with them. And as we do that, here's why I'm doing it. Faith influencer. What if I could influence 100 families to have a successful blended family? Or what if I could influence 1,000 families? Or what if I could influence 100,000 families to not only survive, but to thrive in their blended family? That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm out of my comfort zone and willing to be vulnerable. Not my strong suit. I'd rather not, but necessary as we deal with this subject. And so let me say this last thing. So now I stepped into a new relationship, remarried, his, hers, and that was 15 years ago. 15 years ago. I'm telling you that to say that a blended family can make it, can overcome the statistic, can survive. So now 15 years later, guess what? We have his, hers, and now the surprise, we have ours. A surprise, but a great surprise. So thank you for joining us at Faith Influencer. I'm excited about the road that we're going to take, and I'm excited about opening the book to the rules of successfully blending families.